A young woman was sold to bear a child she could never love. The child's father was a cold millionaire without soul, without forgiveness. But what was born between them was stronger than the contract. If you enjoy stories of love and romance, watch until the end, subscribe to this channel, and leave a comment saying where you're watching from. Aurora Bennett always knew her life didn't belong to her. At 19, she had learned to walk silently through the corridors of her family's old plantation house in rural Georgia, where the smell of mildew mingled with the sweet aroma of coffee that no longer grew in the arid lands. The colonial mansion, with its high windows and peeling walls, was a mausoleum of broken dreams and shattered promises. Her father, Jonathan Bennett, had once been the coffee king of the region. His lands stretched for miles, and his name was whispered with respect in the trading houses of Atlanta. But the international market had been cruel. Bad harvests followed one another, and debts grew like weeds. Now he spent his days sunk in a worn leather armchair, a bottle of whiskey always within reach, his gaze lost in the mountains that once were his. Aurora's mother, Celeste, had become a shadow. Still beautiful at 42, but with the empty eyes of someone who gave up fighting. She spent hours sitting on the porch, knitting blankets she never finished, as if the repetitive movement of the needles could stitch back together the pieces of her broken life. She rarely spoke, and when she did, it was always about the past, about times when the roses in the garden bloomed and laughter echoed through the rooms. Aurora had grown up in this heavy silence, in this atmosphere of controlled hopelessness. She was different from her parents. She had an ethereal beauty that seemed out of place in that decaying environment. Her eyes were such a light blue they appeared transparent, almost ghostly, and her black hair contrasted with her porcelain-pale skin. People in town commented that she looked like a doll, too beautiful to be real. What Aurora didn't know was that this beauty had drawn attention far beyond the borders of her small Georgia town. Since she was 14, her name had been discreetly listed in an international database, administered by a consortium of powerful families from America and abroad. Their young women of specific lineage were catalogued not as people, but as valuable genetic resources. Aurora was number 144 in the file. Genetic compatibility, 98%. Pure lineage confirmed. Psychological state stable, controllable. Physical characteristics, rare eyes, perfect bone structure. The consortium had been founded decades ago by patriarchs of traditional families who believed that blood was everything. It wasn't just about money. It was about perpetuating legacies, creating dynasties that transcended generations. For this, they needed specific women, young women who could produce pure heirs without emotional complications. It was on a cold morning in July that Aurora's fate was sealed. A man in a dark suit arrived at the plantation, in a black car with Oregon license plates. He introduced himself as Dr. Montgomery, legal representative of a unique opportunity for the Bennett family. Seated in the main room, surrounded by the worn luxury of antique furniture, he opened a leather briefcase and removed documents that would change everything. "The Vance family is interested in your daughter," he told Jonathan, who was surprisingly sober that morning. "It's a surrogate gestation contract, with substantial financial compensation. All the plantation's debts would be paid, and a significant amount would remain for you to start over." Aurora was called to the meeting. She entered the room with hesitant steps, wearing a simple blue cotton dress that enhanced her eyes. Dr. Montgomery observed her with the clinical gaze of someone evaluating a product, noting something on a clipboard. "The proposal is simple," he explained, addressing her directly. "You would spend a period at the Vance family property, in rural Montana, with the objective of producing an heir for Damien Vance. After the birth, you would have the right to a new identity, clean documents, and complete freedom to rebuild your life wherever you wish." Jonathan looked at his daughter with pleading eyes. Celeste continued knitting, as if none of this affected her. Aurora felt the weight of the world on her fragile shoulders. She knew about the family's debts, knew that in a few months they would lose everything. This was the only way out. "And if I accept," she asked in a low voice, "what exactly will be expected of me?" Dr. Montgomery opened a thick dossier. "Damien Vance is 35 years old, single, and will inherit one of the largest agribusiness empires in the country. He needs a child, but without the emotional inconveniences of a traditional marriage. You would live on the property during gestation, would have access to the best medical care, and after giving birth you would be free. Aurora closed her eyes. At 19, she had never had a serious boyfriend, had never left the small town where she was born. The idea of giving herself to a stranger for money made her feel nauseated. But the alternative was to see her family in total misery. "I need time to think," she whispered. "You have until noon tomorrow," Dr. Montgomery replied, putting away the papers. "The decision needs to be quick. Damien Vance doesn't like to wait." That night, Aurora walked through the empty fields of the plantation, under a starry sky that seemed to mock her smallness. She thought about her mother, lost in her memories, her father, drowned in alcohol and bitterness. She thought about the life she never had, the dreams she never dreamed, and she made her decision. The next morning, with trembling hands but a firm voice, Aurora Bennett signed the contract that would transform her from a person into a commodity. She didn't know that thousands of miles away, in the frozen vastness of the Montana prairie, a man with gray eyes was about to discover that some contracts are impossible to fulfill when the heart decides to break all the rules. The journey from Georgia to Montana took 2 entire days. Aurora traveled in silence in the back seat of a luxury car, driven by a chauffeur who didn't utter a single word throughout the entire journey. She carried only a small suitcase with her few clothes and a leather-bound diary she had received from her grandmother years ago. With every mile that took her father from the family plantation, she felt as if a part of her soul was left behind. Montana received her with a biting cold and a sky heavy with dark clouds. The Vance property was located inland, 3 hours from Portland, in a region where plains stretched to the horizon and the wind blew with hypnotic constancy. When they finally spotted the gates of the estate, Aurora held her breath. The entrance was imposing. Wrought iron gates with the Vance family crest, 2 intertwined serpents around a black rose. A stone road snaked for miles through fields where Arabian horses grazed freely, their manes fluttering in the wind like dark flags. The main house appeared like an apparition at the end of the road, a Gothic stone construction, with pointed towers and arched windows that seemed like empty eyes observing her arrival. The driver stopped in front of the main entrance and got out to open Aurora's door. She descended slowly, feeling her legs weak after so many hours traveling. The southern wind hit her full force, making her simple dress cling to her thin body. For the first time since signing the contract, the reality of what she was doing hit her like a punch to the stomach. "Miss Bennett," the deep voice made her turn. A tall man with graying hair and aristocratic bearing descended the marble steps of the entrance. He wore an impeccable suit and carried a cane with a silver handle, more for elegance than necessity. "I'm Edward Vance, administrator of the property. Welcome to Shadow Ridge Estate." Aurora made an awkward curtsy. Edward examined her from head to toe with calculating eyes, like a buyer appraising cattle. Apparently satisfied, he motioned for her to follow him. "Damien will receive you in a few minutes," he explained as they walked through the dark corridors of the house. The walls were covered with dark wood panels, decorated with old portraits of stern-looking men. Generations of Vances who seemed to judge anyone who dared step on that sacred ground. "There are some rules you should know. You'll have free access to the ground floor and the second floor, where your room is. The third floor is restricted. Meals will be served in your room or in the library as you prefer. Avoid the gardens at night. The dogs are trained to attack intruders." Aurora nodded in silence, trying to absorb all the information while observing the dark luxury that surrounded her. Crystal chandeliers hung from the high ceiling, but the light emanating from them was weak, creating dancing shadows on the walls. The air smelled of candle wax and something else, something sweet and sickening that she couldn't identify. They ended up in an immense library, with shelves that extended from floor to ceiling, filled with old books with leather spines. A fireplace crackled in the corner, but the heat seemed unable to warm the environment. Edward indicated a burgundy velvet armchair. "Wait here. Damien will arrive shortly." Aurora sat on the edge of the armchair, her hands folded in her lap. She observed the titles of the nearest books, many in Latin, others in English and French. There were treatises on medicine, philosophy, history of ancient civilizations. All seemed old, some with yellowed pages that came out of place. The sound of footsteps echoed down the hallway. Aurora straightened, her heart racing. The door opened slowly, and he entered. Damien Vance was different from everything she had imagined. Tall with broad shoulders that filled the dark blazer he wore, he moved with the predatory elegance of a feline. His black hair was combed back, revealing an angular face with striking features, square jaw, straight nose, thin lips that seemed never to have smiled. But it was his eyes that hypnotized her, grey like a winter storm, cold and penetrating that seemed to see through her soul. He observed her for long seconds without saying a word. Aurora felt herself diminishing under that gaze, as if she were being dissected. Finally, Damien approached and extended his hand. "Aurora Bennett," he said, his deep voice echoing through the library. It wasn't a question, but a statement. "I was expecting someone different." She shook his hand, surprised by the coldness of his skin and the firmness of his grip. "Different how?" The hint of a smile, or was it disdain, crossed Damien's lips. "Less fragile. The work ahead of you requires endurance." Aurora felt her face heat up. She withdrew her hand abruptly. "I might be stronger than I appear. We'll see." Damien walked to the fireplace, his hands folded behind his back. The fire reflected in his hair, creating reddish reflections that made him look diabolical. "Edward explained the rules?" He did. "Then you know that our interaction will be strictly professional. I'm not given to sentimentalities or futile conversations. You are here with a specific purpose, and I expect you to fulfill it with efficiency." The coldness in Damien's words made Aurora shiver. She had expected distance, but not this calculated cruelty. "And when do we begin?" Damien turned to face her again. His eyes seemed to evaluate every inch of her body, and Aurora felt naked under that scrutiny. "The doctors will examine you tomorrow morning. If everything is in order, we'll start next week. The fertile period has been calculated with precision." Aurora swallowed hard. The reality of what she was about to do hit her with full force. She would be used as an incubator, nothing more. Damien didn't see her as a person, but as a means to an end. "May I ask a question?" She dared. Damien raised an eyebrow. "You may. Why me? Why not a woman from your social circle?" For a moment, something different passed through Damien's eyes. A shadow of pain, perhaps, or regret. But it disappeared so quickly that Aurora thought she had imagined it. "Because women from my circle come with expectations," he replied coldly. "Expectations that I cannot, or do not want to meet. You are a blank page without emotional ties to me or my family. That makes everything simpler." Aurora nodded, trying to hide the hurt his words caused. Damien headed for the door but stopped in the doorway. "Your room is on the second floor, third door on the right. Dinner will be served at 8. I recommend that you rest. Tomorrow will be a long day." And with that he left, leaving Aurora alone in the dark library, with only the crackling of the fire and the echo of her own doubts as company. She looked at the tall windows, where night was beginning to fall over the endless fields, and wondered if she had made the right choice. But it was too late to turn back. Her fate was sealed, and Damien Vance was now the master of her future. Aurora's room was on the second floor, in a wing that seemed to have been deserted for years. It was spacious but cold, decorated with antique dark wood furniture and heavy moss-green velvet curtains that blocked almost all natural light. A four-poster bed dominated the center of the room, covered with white sheets that smelled of lavender and mothballs. On the opposite wall, a mahogany desk was positioned in front of a window that offered a view of the rear gardens of the property. Aurora spent the first night awake, listening to the strange sounds the house emitted. Wood crackling, wind whistling through the gaps, and something else. Slow footsteps in the corridor, which always stopped in front of her door for a few seconds before moving on. She got up once to peek through the keyhole, but saw only darkness. The next morning, a middle-aged woman knocked on her door carrying a tray with breakfast. She introduced herself as Irene, the housekeeper, a thin woman with grey hair tied in a severe bun and suspicious eyes. "Dr. Mercer will arrive in an hour for the examinations," she informed with a harsh voice, placing the tray on the desk. "Mr. Damien said for you to prepare adequately." Aurora observed the black coffee, the still warm French bread, and the homemade blackberry jam. "Irene, may I ask you a question?" The housekeeper stopped at the door, visibly reluctant to prolong the conversation. "You may. How long have you worked here?" 23 years, the answer came dry, cutting. "Then you knew." "Damien's first wife." Irene's face closed like a door slamming. "We do not speak of that in this house. And you would do well not to ask more questions of that kind." Before Aurora could respond, Irene had left, slamming the door with more force than necessary. Aurora was left alone with her questions, and a growing feeling that there were secrets in that house that no one wanted to share. Dr. Mercer arrived promptly at 9. He was a short, plump man, with thick-lensed glasses and an oily smile that didn't inspire confidence. He carried an old medical bag and spoke to Aurora as if she were a child. "Just routine exams, my dear," he said, preparing instruments on the table. "We need to ensure that you are in perfect condition to fulfill your part of the agreement." The examinations were humiliating and invasive. Aurora submitted to them, biting her lips not to cry, while the doctor made notes in a notebook and muttered technical comments to himself. When he finished, he seemed satisfied. "Everything perfect," he announced, putting away the instruments. "Ovulation predicted in 4 days. Mr. Damien will be pleased." After the doctor's departure, Aurora felt dirty and violated. She took a long bath in the marble bathtub of her room, trying to wash away the feeling of the doctor's hands on her skin. It was then that she heard the piano. The melody came from the floor below, a sad and melancholic song that seemed impregnated with longing. Aurora dressed quickly and descended the stairs, following the sound. She found herself in a room she hadn't seen before, a music salon with a black grand piano positioned in the center. But when she reached the door, the music stopped abruptly. The room was empty. Aurora walked to the piano and ran her fingers over the keys. They were covered with dust, as if no one had played there for years. But she was absolutely certain that she had heard music coming from that instrument. She noticed a sheet music forgotten on the stand. Farewell Waltz, composed by someone named Isabella Vance. "You shouldn't be here." Aurora turned, startled. Damien was standing at the entrance to the room, his face darker than usual. He wore riding clothes, leather pants, tall boots, and a white shirt that highlighted the breadth of his shoulders. "I heard music," she explained, trying to keep her voice steady. "I thought that—" "There has been no music in this room for 5 years, Damien interrupted her, walking toward her with slow, deliberate steps. "It must have been your imagination." Aurora held the sheet music. "Who is Isabella Vance?" Damien's face contorted as if she had slapped him. For a moment, Aurora saw genuine pain in his grey eyes, a vulnerability that he struggled to hide. "She was my wife," he finally said, his voice low and controlled. "She died 5 years ago." "What happened to her?" Damien snatched the sheet music from Aurora's hands with an abrupt movement. "That is none of your concern, and I recommend that you do not return to this room. There are places in this house that are dangerous for those who don't know them." There was a veiled threat in his words, but also something more, fear perhaps. Aurora studied him, noting the tension in his jaw, the way his fists closed unconsciously. "Damien," she said softly, daring to use his name for the first time. "I didn't come here to cause problems. I just want to understand where I am, with whom I am." He stared at her for long seconds, and Aurora felt something electrifying in the air between them. For the first time, Damien seemed to really see her as a person, not just as a means to an end. "You want to understand?" he asked, coming so close that Aurora could smell his skin, leather, cedar, and something wild. "Then understand this. This house has memories that don't die. There are ghosts here that haven't found peace. And you awaken things that are better left dormant." Aurora felt a shiver run down her spine. "Ghosts?" Damien smiled, but there was no humor in the expression. Metaphorically speaking, of course. "But Isabella didn't like visitors. And sometimes, when the southern wind blows strong, it's as if she were still here, protecting what she considers hers." Before Aurora could respond, Damien turned and left the room, leaving her alone with more questions than answers. She looked again at the dusty piano and swore she heard a faint, almost imperceptible whisper, "He is not who you think he is." That afternoon, Aurora decided to explore the property. She walked through the rear gardens, where wild rose bushes grew without care among marble statues stained by time. There was a labyrinth of bushes at the back of the grounds, and at its center, a dry fountain decorated with cherubs that seemed to weep tears of moss. It was when she was returning to the house that she saw the window on the 3rd floor, the restricted wing. A curtain moved slightly, as if someone were observing her. Aurora stopped and looked fixedly at the window, trying to see who was there. For a moment she thought she saw a masculine silhouette, but when she blinked, there was nothing. That night, Aurora began to write in her diary. She wrote about the dark house, about Damien and his secrets, about the feeling of being watched. She wrote about the fear she felt, but also about a strange curiosity that was growing inside her. There was something in that property, something beyond the contract she had signed, something that pulled her like a magnet. As she wrote, she didn't notice that outside her door, a shadow remained motionless, as if someone were listening to the scratching of her pen on the paper. And when she finally turned off the light and lay down, she didn't see the grey eyes watching her from the window, nor did she realize that there were two figures in the darkness, one she knew, and another she had never seen before. The next 4 days passed in a kind of temporal suspension. Aurora explored the house during the mornings, always avoiding the third floor in the music room, as per Damien's orders. He appeared only at dinner meals, sitting at the head of the mahogany table in the dining room, while she occupied a side chair. The distance between them measured not only in feet, but in different worlds. Conversations were minimal, punctuated only by polite comments about the weather or questions about her comfort. Damien read the newspaper while eating, avoiding looking directly at her. But Aurora noticed that he observed her from the corners of his eyes, studying her movements, the way she held the silverware, how she ran her hand through her hair when she was nervous. On Thursday night, Dr. Mercer returned to confirm that Aurora was in her fertile period. She submitted again to the humiliating examinations, biting her lips until she tasted blood. When the doctor left, Aurora was alone in her room, trembling not from cold but from anxiety. She knew this would be the night. Damien appeared at her door at 9 o'clock sharp. He wore a dark silk robe over what was obviously a bare chest, and his black hair was slightly damp, as if he had just stepped out of the shower. Aurora was sitting on the edge of the bed, wearing only a white cotton nightgown that Irene had left for her. A simple piece, but one that accentuated the paleness of her skin and the translucent blue of her eyes. "May I come in?" he asked, his voice lower than usual. Aurora nodded, not trusting her own voice. Damien entered and closed the door behind him, but did not lock it. He remained standing near the entrance, as if he might still change his mind and leave. "Before we do this," he said, avoiding looking directly at her, "I want you to understand that it's purely functional. There are no feelings involved. It's a procedure, nothing more." Aurora felt a stab of pain in her chest, but nodded. "I understand." Damien approached slowly, as if he were approaching a wild animal that might flee at any moment. When he reached the bed, he stopped and finally looked into her eyes. "Are you afraid of me?" he asked. Aurora considered lying, but something in his expression prevented her. "A little. But it's not fear that you'll hurt me physically." "Then fear of what?" "Fear of losing myself in this. Fear that when it's over, I won't be the same person." Damien studied her face for long seconds. There was something different in his expression, a softness that Aurora hadn't seen before. Slowly, he extended his hand and touched her face, his fingers trailing over her cheek with surprising delicacy. "Perhaps," he whispered, "neither of us will be the same afterward." Damien's touch was like fire and ice at the same time. Aurora closed her eyes, leaning her face into the palm of his hand. When she opened them again, she saw that he was closer, his face just inches from hers. "Aurora," he murmured her name like a prayer. "Yes?" "Don't think of anything beyond this moment." And then he kissed her. The kiss began gently, almost hesitantly, but quickly intensified when Aurora responded, her lips parting beneath his. There was a desperate hunger in the way Damien kissed her, as if he were trying to drown in her to forget some ancient pain. Aurora felt her defenses crumbling one by one, replaced by a desire she didn't know she possessed. Damien pushed her gently against the pillows, his hands exploring her body through the thin nightgown. Aurora arched her back when he kissed her neck, his skin hot against hers. There was an urgency in his movements, but also a reverence, as if he were touching something sacred and fragile. "Look at me," he said, when his hands found the hem of her nightgown. "I want to see your eyes." Aurora stared at him while he slowly removed her only piece of clothing, completely exposing her to the faint moonlight coming through the window. For a moment, Damien merely contemplated her, his breathing growing heavier. "You are—" he began, but didn't finish the sentence. "What?" Aurora whispered. "Perfect," he finally said. But there was a sadness in his voice that she couldn't understand. When he shed his robe, Aurora saw that Damien's body was a work of art sculpted in muscle and scars. There was a strange mark on his left shoulder, something that looked like an old burn in the shape of a cross. She wanted to ask about the scar, but Damien kissed her again, making her forget everything except the sensations he awakened in her body. What happened next wasn't just functional, as Damien had promised. It was intense, passionate, almost desperate. Aurora lost herself in the sensation of his lips on her skin, in the strong hands that held her as if she might break, in the delicious weight of his body on hers. When they finally joined, she called out his name, and Damien silenced her with a kiss that tasted of desperation and redemption. Afterward, they lay in silence, both still breathing rapidly. Damien held her against his chest, his fingers playing distractedly with her hair. Aurora could feel his heart beating strongly beneath her ear. "Damien," she whispered. "The scar on your shoulder. How did you get it?" His body stiffened imperceptibly. It was a long time ago. "It looks like a branding mark." Damien moved away slightly, looking at her with a strange expression. "Why do you say that?" "My grandfather was a blacksmith. I recognize branding marks." Aurora gently touched the scar. "Did someone purposely mark you?" Damien grabbed her hand, moving it away from the scar. "It was different before," he said enigmatically. "Different how?" "More wild, more dangerous." Damien abruptly rose from the bed, putting on his robe. "I need to go." Aurora sat up, pulling the sheet to cover her body. "Will you come back tomorrow?" Damien paused at the door, his hand on the knob. "If necessary." "Only if necessary?" He turned to look at her one last time, and Aurora saw something that made her shiver. There were two distinct men in Damien's grey eyes. One who desired her with an intensity that bordered on obsession, and another who seemed to want to protect her from himself. "Good night, Aurora," he said, and left. Alone in the room, Aurora touched her lips, swollen from Damien's kisses, and wondered what had just happened. She had been hired for a clinical procedure, but what she had experienced was pure passion. And there was something more. A strange sensation that she knew that touch, those caresses, as if it weren't the first time it had happened. She got up and walked to the window, looking at the gardens bathed in moonlight. It was then that she saw a figure walking among the bushes. A tall man with broad shoulders, very similar to Damien. But Damien had just left her room, and from the direction he had taken, he should be on the opposite side of the house. Aurora rubbed her eyes, thinking she was imagining things. When she looked again, the figure had disappeared. But on the windowsill she found something that made her blood run cold. A black rose, still moist with dew, as if it had just been picked and placed there. Inside one of the petals was a small burned mark, exactly like the scar on Damien's shoulder. Aurora held the rose with trembling hands, realizing that she had entered a web much more complex than she had imagined. And for the first time since she had arrived at the property, she felt that she was being hunted. Aurora awoke the next morning with her body aching and her mind confused. The black rose was still on the windowsill, more withered now, but the small burned mark on the petal remained clear. She held it against the light, studying the design. It was identical to the scar on Damien's shoulder, as if it had been made with the same branding iron. During breakfast, Irene entered the room with an expression even more severe than usual. "Mr. Damien travelled to Portland," she announced dryly. "He will return in 3 days." Aurora tried to hide her disappointment. "Did he say the reason for the trip?" "Family business." Irene arranged the curtains with abrupt movements. "And before you ask, no, he didn't leave any message for you." Alone on the estate, Aurora decided it was time to explore more deeply the secrets that the house hid. She started with the library, where she had met Damien on the first day. She spent hours leafing through old books, looking for any reference to the Vance family or the mysterious Isabella. It was late in the afternoon when she found something interesting. Between the pages of a volume on Montana history, she discovered an old photograph. It showed 2 young men, identical, wearing military uniforms. On the back, someone had written in elegant handwriting, "Damien and Adrian Vance, 1985. The 2 were absolutely identical, impossible to distinguish. Aurora studied the photograph carefully. One of the men had an open smile, his eyes shining with genuine joy. The other maintained a more serious, more controlled expression, exactly like the Damien she knew. But which was which? She continued searching and found more photographs scattered among the books, as if someone had purposely hidden them. One showed the teenage twins riding horses. Another showed them at a formal party, both wearing tuxedos, surrounded by elegant people. In all the photos, one of the brothers seemed wilder, freer, while the other always maintained the same rigid posture. You shouldn't be looking at those. Aurora turned, startled. Edward Vance was standing at the entrance to the library, his face darker than ever. She tried to hide the photographs, but he approached and extended his hand. "Give me the photos." "Miss Bennet, I was just curious about the family," Aurora said, reluctantly handing over the photographs. "Who is Adrian?" Edward put the photos in the inside pocket of his jacket. "He was Damien's brother. He died many years ago." "How did he die?" "Accident." The response came too quickly, too rehearsed. "And I recommend that you don't ask more questions about matters that don't concern you." But Aurora had seen something in Edward's eyes, fear. He wasn't just irritated by her curiosity. He was genuinely frightened. That night, Aurora couldn't sleep. She paced the room thinking about the photographs, the black rose, Damien's scar. Something was wrong, something that didn't fit. Around 2 in the morning, she again heard footsteps in the hallway. This time she decided to investigate. She carefully opened the door and peeked out. The corridor was dark, but a faint light came from the end where the stairs to the 3rd floor were located. Aurora put on her slippers and followed the direction of the light, her heart beating rapidly. The stairs to the 3rd floor creaked beneath her feet. At the top, she found a hallway identical to that of the 2nd floor, but this one had clearly been abandoned for years. The air smelled of mildew and chemical cleaning products. Several doors were closed, but one was ajar, and that's where the light was coming from. Aurora approached slowly and peeked through the gap. It was a feminine room, decorated in shades of pink and gold, delicate furniture, a vanity with ornate mirrors, a 4-poster bed covered in dust. On the walls, dozens of photographs of the same woman, a beautiful young woman with brown hair and a radiant smile, Isabella. In the center of the room, a male figure was kneeling before the bed, holding something in his hands. Aurora couldn't see the man's face, but she recognized the posture, the breadth of the shoulders. It was Damien, or at least someone identical to him. The man was whispering something, words that Aurora couldn't distinguish. She leaned forward more, trying to hear better, when the floorboard creaked beneath her feet. The man turned abruptly. Aurora suppressed a scream. It was Damien's face, but there was something different in the eyes, a wildness, an intensity that made her instinctively back away. The man stared at her for long seconds, a slow smile forming on his lips. "Hello, Aurora," he said, and his voice was identical to Damien's, but there was a different quality to it, harsher, rawer. "I was wondering when you would come to visit me." Aurora wanted to run, but her legs seemed made of lead. Are you Damien?" The man laughed, a low and disturbing sound. "Sometimes. Depends on the day, the moon, my mood." He rose slowly, and Aurora saw that he was holding a diary bound in pink leather. "Do you want to know about Isabella? About what really happened to her?" "Edward said you died," Aurora whispered. "Edward lies very well." "That's what my grandfather pays him for." The man, Adrian, she presumed, approached. "The truth is much more interesting than the official lie." "What is the truth?" Adrian extended the diary to her. "Read for yourself." Isabella documented everything, right up to the last day. Aurora took the diary with trembling hands. The cover was worn from use, the pages yellowed. "Why are you showing me this?" "Because you have the right to know who you're really sleeping with." Adrian touched her face with the same delicacy that Damien had demonstrated the night before. "And because Isabella was like you, innocent, trusting, in love with the wrong man." "Damien isn't—" "Damien is exactly what you think he is," Adrian interrupted her. "The problem is that I am too." Aurora felt a shiver run down her spine. "I don't understand." "You will when you read the diary." Adrian backed away, the shadows of the room seeming to swallow him. "But be careful, Aurora. Some truths are too dangerous to be known." "Wait," Aurora called, but when she blinked, he had vanished. She was alone in Isabella's room, holding the diary that might contain the answers to all her questions. Back in her room, Aurora opened the diary with trembling fingers. The first entry was from 3 years ago. "Dear Diary, today I met my future husband. Damien Vance is the most handsome man I've ever seen. Tall, dark, with grey eyes that seem to see through my soul. But there's something about him, a deep sadness, as if he carried a terrible weight. I will discover his secrets and heal him with my love." Aurora turned the pages, reading about the beginning of the relationship between Isabella and Damien. It was an intense, passionate love story. Isabella described nights of passion, days of happiness, plans for the future. But gradually the tone of the entries began to change. "Damien has been strange lately. Sometimes he's the gentleman I met. Other times he seems like a stranger. Last night he kissed me so hard it hurt my lips, but afterward he cried and apologized. It's as if there were two people inside him." Aurora continued reading, her heart tight. Isabella had begun to suspect something. "I found Damien in the garden this morning, but he swore he was sleeping. How can he be in two places at once? And why does he deny having been there when I clearly saw him?" The last entry in the diary was from just 2 weeks before Isabella's death. "I discovered the terrible truth. There are two of them. Twins who play with me like a cat with a mouse. I no longer know which one I'm married to, which one I'm sleeping with. One of them loves me, the other hates me. And I am pregnant, and I don't know whose child it is. I need to escape before it's too late." Aurora closed the diary, her hands shaking. Now she understood everything. The black rose, the scar, the different looks, the sensation that she knew that touch. She wasn't sleeping only with Damien. There were two people, two identical men who shared her life without her knowing. And if Isabella had died for discovering this secret, what would be Aurora's fate? Aurora spent the next 3 days in a state of agony. She had hidden Isabella's diary in a secret drawer of her desk, but she couldn't stop thinking about what she had read. Every word written by the desperate hand of the deceased wife echoed in her mind like a dark prophecy. She felt like a prisoner of her own ignorance, manipulated by two men who played with her life as if it were a macabre game. During those days, there were no signs of Adrian. The third floor remained silent, and Aurora began to wonder if she had imagined everything. But the presence of the diary in her drawer was proof enough that Damien's disappeared brother was very much alive and very close. Irene noticed her growing anxiety. "You're eating very little," she commented one morning, observing Aurora's untouched breakfast. "If you're pregnant, you need to eat properly." The word pregnant made Aurora shudder. She hadn't had her period, and it had been almost 2 weeks since that night with Damien. Or was it Adrian? The uncertainty corroded her from within. How could she know which of the brothers had touched her body, which had whispered her name in the dark? Damien returned on a rainy Thursday. Aurora saw him arriving from her bedroom window. A black car climbing the stone road, headlights cutting through the grey fog that covered the fields. Her heart accelerated, but she didn't know if it was from relief, fear, or anticipation. He appeared at her door an hour later, wearing a dark suit that made him seem even more imposing. His hair was slightly damp from the rain, and there was a tension in his face that Aurora couldn't decipher. "Aurora," he said, entering without asking permission. "How are you?" She studied him carefully, looking for signs, for clues that would reveal which of the brothers was standing before her. But the twins were too identical. Same height, same build, same grey eyes that seemed to guard secrets. "Fine," she answered cautiously. "And you? How was your trip?" Damien approached, and Aurora resisted the impulse to back away. "Productive. I resolved some pending family matters." He touched her face, and Aurora felt a shiver. "I missed you." The words sounded sincere, but Aurora couldn't trust anything anymore. "Damien," she said, deciding to confront him, "may I ask a question?" "Of course. Your brother Adrian, did he really die?" Damien's face stiffened imperceptibly. It was a subtle change, almost imperceptible, but Aurora caught it. "Why do you ask that?" "Edward mentioned him, and I was curious." Damien walked to the window, his hands folded behind his back. "Adrian died in a riding accident 5 years ago, on the same day as Isabella." "What a terrible coincidence," Aurora murmured, observing his every movement. "It wasn't a coincidence." Damien turned to face her, and there was genuine pain in his eyes. "Adrian was with Isabella when she fell down the stairs. He tried to save her, but ended up falling too. Both died instantly. The story was well constructed, but Aurora knew the truth. She knew that Adrian was alive, hidden on the third floor like a ghost haunting his own house. The question was, did Damien know that she knew? "It must have been very difficult for you," she said softly. "It was devastating." Damien approached again, his hands finding her shoulders. "I lost my twin brother and my wife on the same day. For a long time I thought about following the same path as them." Aurora felt a wave of genuine compassion, even knowing he was lying. There was real suffering in his voice, a pain that couldn't be faked. Perhaps the situation was more complex than Isabella's diary suggested. "Damien," she said, placing her hands over his, "you can trust me. If there's something you need to tell me." For a moment she saw vulnerability in his grey eyes. Damien seemed to be fighting with himself, as if deciding whether or not to reveal a terrible secret. But then his defenses rose again. "There's nothing to tell," he said, kissing her forehead. "The past is dead and buried." That night Damien visited her again. But this time Aurora was prepared. She observed every movement, every caress, every whisper, looking for differences, for clues that would reveal which of the brothers was with her. There was a different urgency in his touches, an almost desperate intensity, as if he were trying to hold on to something he might lose. When they finished, Aurora pretended to sleep, while Damien remained awake beside her. She could feel his eyes on her, could hear his irregular breathing. There was something different about him, a restlessness that wasn't present the first night they spent together. "Aurora," he whispered, thinking she was asleep. "Forgive me for what is to come." Aurora kept her eyes closed, but her heart accelerated. What did he mean by that? What danger was approaching? Damien carefully rose from the bed and dressed in the dark. Aurora watched him through half-closed eyelids as he walked to the window and looked out at the gardens. For long minutes he remained motionless, like a marble statue bathed in moonlight. Then something extraordinary happened. An identical figure emerged from the shadows of the garden and waved to the window. Damien waved back, a quick and furtive gesture. Aurora had to bite her lips not to exclaim aloud. There was the definitive proof. Adrian was alive and the brothers were coordinating something. Damien left the room silently, and Aurora waited a few minutes before getting up and running to the window. Down below, the two brothers met near the dry fountain in the center of the garden. Even from a distance, she could see they were arguing animatedly, their agitated gestures revealing tension between them. The conversation lasted only a few minutes before they separated, one returning to the house, the other disappearing into the darkness of the fields. Aurora ran back to the bed, pretending to sleep when Damien returned. He stood beside the bed for several minutes observing her, before leaving for good. The next day, Aurora decided it was time to confront the situation. She was tired of being manipulated, of living in a lie constructed by two people who played with her life. During breakfast, when Damien appeared in the dining room wearing riding clothes, she took courage. "I need to go to town today," she announced. "To do some medical exams." Damien looked at her with surprise. "Dr. Mercer can come here." "I prefer to go to the hospital. I want a second opinion about the possibility of being pregnant." The word pregnant made Damien stiffen in his chair. "You think you might be?" "It's possible." Aurora looked at him directly. "The question is, whose child would it be?" The silence that followed was charged with electricity. Damien slowly put down his fork, his grey eyes narrowing. "What do you mean by that?" "You know exactly what I mean." Damien rose abruptly, the chair scraping on the wooden floor. For a moment, Aurora thought he would deny everything, maintain the facade. But then, to her surprise, he laughed, a low and bitter sound. "How long have you known?" he asked. "Since I read Isabella's diary." Damien closed his eyes as if he had received a physical blow. "Adrian gave it to you." "He did." Aurora stood too, facing him. "The question is, which of you two actually slept with me?" Damien stared at her for long seconds, and Aurora saw in him a mixture of admiration and desperation. "You are braver than Isabella," he said finally. "She ran away when she found out. You are here facing the truth. And what is the truth, Damien? Who are you, really?" Before he could answer, the door to the dining room opened. Adrian entered, wearing clothes identical to Damien's, the same dark smile that Aurora had seen in Isabella's room. "Hello, brother," Adrian said, stopping beside Damien. "I thought it was time we stopped playing hide-and-seek." Aurora looked from one to the other, the two identical men who had transformed her life into a nightmare. Now finally, she would have the answers she was looking for. But would she be able to handle the truth? Aurora instinctively backed away upon seeing the two men side by side. The resemblance was disturbing, not just physical but in the minutest details. The same way of tilting the head, the same way of crossing their arms, even the same cross-shaped scar on the left shoulder. But there were subtle differences that only now she could perceive. Damien maintained a more rigid, controlled posture, while Adrian radiated a wilder, more unpredictable energy. Finally, Adrian said, his smile widening as he observed Aurora's shocked expression, "I was getting tired of hiding like a rat in the attic." "Adrian," Damien said in a warning tone, "we talked about this. We talked about many things, brother. But she has the right to know the truth." Adrian walked to Aurora, who remained motionless near the table, especially now that she might be carrying our child. "Our?" Aurora managed to ask, her voice coming out as a whisper. Damien and Adrian exchanged a look loaded with tension. There was something there, a silent communication between them that Aurora couldn't decipher. Finally, Damien sighed deeply. "Sit down, Aurora," he said, pulling out a chair for her. "It's a long story." Aurora sat down on weak legs, her eyes alternating between the two men. "Start with the part where Adrian was supposed to be dead." Adrian laughed, a humorless sound. "The death was exaggerated. Let's say it was convenient for everyone to believe that I had died along with Isabella." "Why?" "Because I killed her," Adrian said with a coldness that made Aurora shiver. "Adrian," Damien growled, but his brother continued. "Not in the way you think," Adrian said quickly, noticing the horror on Aurora's face. "It was an accident, but an accident caused by our peculiar situation." Damien approached the window, his face tense. "Adrian and I were always close. Too close, according to our grandfather. When we were children, we played at switching places, confusing people. It was an innocent game. Until it wasn't anymore," Adrian continued. "When we grew up, the game became more complex. We shared everything. Friends, girlfriends, responsibilities. There was never jealousy between us because we were like two halves of the same person." Aurora tried to process the information. "And Isabella?" "Isabella married me," Damien said, still looking out the window. "Or at least she thought she did. The truth is that she married both of us." "She never knew," Adrian added. "At least not in the beginning. Damien was the official husband, but I visited her when he traveled. She thought it was always the same man." Aurora's stomach turned. "You're saying that you shared your wife without her knowing?" "It wasn't so calculated." Damien turned, the pain evident in his eyes. "Isabella was my special. We both fell in love with her, and instead of fighting, we decided that we could love her together. It worked for a time. Until she discovered," Adrian said darkly. "Isabella began to notice small differences. I was more impulsive than Damien, more affectionate. Damien was more controlled, more distant. She began to suspect." Aurora remembered the diary. "She wrote that she felt like you were playing with her." "You read everything?" Damien asked. "I did. She discovered about you two and was terrified. She said she was pregnant and didn't know whose child it was." The heavy silence extended through the room. Finally, Adrian spoke. "The night she died, Isabella had decided to flee. She packed her bags and was descending the stairs when she saw me in the hall. I'd just come in through the side door after spending the afternoon in the fields. She thought I was Damien," Damien continued the story. "She began to accuse me, said that she knew about Adrian, that she wasn't crazy like we were trying to make her believe. But I didn't know what she was talking about. I had just returned from a trip. I heard the discussion and came up the stairs," Adrian said, his voice heavy with guilt. "When Isabella saw me arriving while Damien was still downstairs, she finally understood everything. The shock was so great that she backed up, lost her balance and fell." Aurora covered her mouth with her hands. "And the baby?" "She lost it in the fall," Damien said softly. "Both she and the child died instantly." "I held her body in my arms," Adrian continued, tears in his eyes. "There was so much blood, and when my grandfather arrived, he found the scene. Damien crying over his wife's body, me covered in her blood. For him, it was obvious what had happened. He thought Adrian had killed Isabella out of jealousy," Damien explained. Anne decided it would be better for the family if Adrian simply disappeared. Officially, he died trying to save Isabella. Unofficially, he was banished, forced to live as a ghost in his own house. Aurora tried to absorb everything she was hearing. "And you agreed to this? What choice did we have?" Adrian asked bitterly. "My grandfather threatened to destroy everything if I didn't cooperate. He said he would report me to the police for murder if I didn't agree to stay dead. I tried to protect him," Damien added. "But our grandfather's power is absolute. So Adrian spent the last 5 years hidden on the 3rd floor, going out only at night, living like a prisoner." Aurora abruptly stood up, beginning to pace back and forth. "And me? Where do I fit into this whole madness?" The brothers exchanged another look. "The contract was our grandfather's idea," Damien said. "He wants a pure heir, without emotional complications. But when you arrived, Adrian continued, we both felt attracted to you. Like what happened with Isabella." Aurora stopped pacing, her heart racing. "No, don't tell me that." "The first night was with me," Damien said quickly. "I was with you when we made love for the first time." "But I visited you afterward," Adrian confessed. 3 nights later, when Damien was sleeping. You thought it was him." Aurora felt nauseated. "You did the same thing to me that you did to Isabella." "No," Damien approached, trying to touch her, but she backed away. "With Isabella, it was a game. With you it's different." "Different how?" "Because this time we're fighting," Adrian said. "For the first time in our lives, we want something that we can't share. You." Aurora looked at the two men, seeing for the first time the real tension between them. Damien had his fists clenched. Adrian maintained a defensive posture. There was something violent in the air, a dangerous energy that didn't exist before. "I'm not an object for you to divide," Aurora said with a firm voice. "I'm a person. And I deserve to know, if I'm pregnant, whose child is it?" "We don't know," Damien admitted. "We were both with you during the fertile period. And that doesn't bother you." "It bothers me terribly," Adrian said, "because it means I might lose you." "You already lost me," Aurora said coldly. "Both of you lost me. How can I trust men who have lied to me from the first day?" "Aurora, please," Damien pleaded. "Let me explain." "There's nothing to explain." Aurora walked toward the door. "You are sick, both of you, and I want nothing more to do with this farce." But when she reached the door, she found Edward Vance blocking her exit. The man's face was grim, and he held a phone in his hands. "I'm sorry, Miss Bennet," he said, "but I can't let you leave." "Why?" "Because my father is arriving, and he won't be at all happy to discover that Adrian is alive, and that you all have ruined his plans." Aurora felt a chill run down her spine. "Who is your father?" "The patriarch of the Vance family," Edward answered, "and the man who really controls everything that happens here, including who lives and who dies." From outside, the sound of helicopters approaching echoed across the fields. The game had completely changed, and Aurora realized that the real danger was just beginning. The sound of the helicopters grew until it became deafening, making the house windows vibrate. Aurora watched through the glass as 2 military aircraft landed in the field in front of the property, raising clouds of dust and grass. Men in dark suits jumped from the machines, forming a security perimeter, before an imposing figure emerged from the main helicopter. Augustus Vance was 85 years old, but his presence dominated the environment like a general on a battlefield. Tall, thin as a greyhound, with white hair combed back and blue eyes cold as Arctic ice. He wore an impeccable suit and carried a gold-handled cane that he clearly didn't need for support. It was a symbol of power, not weakness. "My grandfather," Damien murmured, his voice carrying a mixture of respect and fear. "He doesn't know you're alive," Edward said to Adrian. "When he finds out, he'll kill me," Adrian completed coldly, "or try to." Aurora observed the dynamics between the men in the room. Damien had stiffened completely, his posture changing to something almost military. Edward was visibly sweating, his hands trembling while he put away his phone. Only Adrian seemed relaxed, but there was a dangerous energy emanating from him, like a predator ready to attack. "Listen," Damien said quickly. "Aurora, you need to pretend you don't know about Adrian. If my grandfather discovers that she knows the truth—" "Too late for lies," Adrian said, walking to the window. "He's not an idiot. He'll figure everything out in a matter of minutes." Heavy footsteps echoed through the main corridor. Aurora felt as if the air had been sucked from the room when Augustus Vance entered, his presence filling every corner of the environment. His blue eyes scanned the room, stopping briefly on each person before fixing on Adrian. The silence that followed was so heavy that Aurora could barely breathe. Augustus studied the grandson who should have been dead with the expression of someone analyzing a particularly repugnant insect. "Adrian," he finally said, his voice low but carrying absolute authority. "I figured you would eventually appear. Rats always return to where there is food." "Grandfather," Adrian responded with an insolent smile. "What a pleasure to see you again. I was beginning to miss your sermons on blood purity and family traditions." Augustus struck his cane on the floor with force. "Edward, you allowed this. Heir to hide on my property." Edward swallowed hard. "Sir, leave Edward alone," Damien intervened. "The decision was mine. Adrian is my brother." "Adrian is a murderer," Augustus declared, "and he should have been handed over to the police 5 years ago." "Isabella died by accident," Adrian said, stepping forward, "and you know it. I know that you killed her. That's enough." Augustus then turned his attention to Aurora, and she felt as if she were being examined under a microscope. "Miss Bennet, how are you adapting to the peculiarities of the family?" Aurora raised her chin, refusing to show fear. "I discovered that lies and manipulation seem to be family traditions." A cold smile formed on Augustus's lips. "Perceptive. I like that. Much better than the last one, who was too weak to understand her function." "My function? You don't imagine you were chosen randomly, do you?" Augustus walked toward her, each step echoing like a sentence. "The consortium that selected you isn't interested in just common heirs. We're creating a new generation of superior lineage." Aurora felt a shiver of horror. "What are you talking about? Your family, Miss Bennet, carries a rare genetic mutation. Your great-grandmother was a carrier of a particular characteristic that makes certain capacities, let's say, enhanced. Superior intelligence, developed intuition, extraordinary physical and emotional endurance." "You're insane," Aurora whispered. "I'm being scientific," Augustus corrected. "The consortium has identified only 47 women in the entire world with this specific mutation. You are one of them. And when crossed with the Vance lineage, which carries complementary traits, the result will be an exceptional child." Damien stepped forward. "Grandfather, enough. Aurora is not a breeding animal." "No?" Augustus raised an eyebrow. "Then why is she here, for love?" He laughed, a sound devoid of warmth. "Damien, you've always been too sentimental. That's why you need guidance." "And if I refuse to have this child?" Aurora asked, her voice firm despite the fear she felt. "Too late for that," Augustus replied, removing a sheet of paper from the inside pocket of his suit. "The tests that Dr. Mercer did yesterday confirmed. You're 6 weeks pregnant." Aurora's world seemed to spin. She held onto the table to keep from falling, the blood draining from her face. "That's impossible." "Very possible," Augustus said, satisfied. "And now we come to the interesting part. Thanks to the creativity of my grandsons, we have a dilemma. We don't know which of the two is the father." Damien and Adrian exchanged tense looks. Aurora saw that both were rigid, ready for anything. "This means," Augustus continued, "that I need to take measures to ensure the experiment isn't compromised. Edward, call the doctor. We'll do a paternity test immediately." "No," Aurora said firmly. "I refuse." "My dear," Augustus approached her dangerously, "you don't have a choice in the matter. You signed a contract. You belong to this family now." "Aurora doesn't belong to anyone," Adrian growled, positioning himself between her and his grandfather. "Ah, the dog finally shows its teeth." Augustus smiled coldly. "Edward, call the men. I want Adrian imprisoned and Miss Bennet in the laboratory." "That's not going to happen," Damien said, positioning himself beside his brother. Augustus observed his 2 grandsons uniting against him and struck his cane on the floor again. "Edward." But Edward didn't move. He was as pale as paper, staring fixedly at something behind Augustus. "Sir," he stammered, There's someone behind you." Everyone turned. Irene was standing at the entrance to the room, but there was something different about her. She held a pistol with steady hands, and her eyes, normally submissive, shone with fierce determination. "Irene," Augustus said slowly, "put down that gun." "I can't do that." "Mr. Augustus," she replied, her voice surprisingly calm, I can't let you do to Aurora what you did to Isabella. What are you talking about? I was a nurse before I came to work here, Irene said. I know how to recognize signs of medical experiments. Isabella was being drugged, wasn't she? Augustus's silence was answer enough. That's why she was confused seeing things, Irene continued. You were testing substances on her, and when she discovered about the twins and tried to flee, she became a risk to the project, Augustus said coldly. As you are becoming now. Irene cocked the gun. Aurora, Damien, Adrian, you have 5 minutes to leave this property. Take what you need and run. Irene, Aurora said, come with us. I can't. Dear, someone needs to make sure you have enough time. Irene smiled sadly. Take good care of that baby. Whoever's it is, it's a new life. And new life means hope. Aurora wanted to protest, but Damien grabbed her by the arm. We have to go now. The cars are blocked, Adrian said, but there's a trail in the back that leads to the main road. You can't run from me forever, Augustus said calmly. I have unlimited resources. I will find you. Maybe, Damien responded, but not today. As they fled the room running, Aurora heard Augustus shouting orders to his men over the radio. The sound of heavy boots echoed through the corridors as the three of them fled through the back door of the house, running toward the forests that surrounded the property. Behind them, a shot echoed through the house. Aurora tried to stop, but Adrian pushed her forward. We can't help her now, he said, tears in his eyes. Irene gave us a chance. We can't waste it. They ran through the cold Montana night, 3 fugitives united by love, lies, and now by the need to survive. Aurora touched her belly instinctively, where a new life was growing, a life that represented both hope and danger. And behind them, Augustus Vance mobilized all his power to bring them back. The hunt had begun. The night of the Montana prairie was merciless. The cutting southern wind lashed the faces of the 3 fugitives as they ran across the open fields, the darkness broken only by the waning moon that appeared and disappeared between heavy clouds. Aurora stumbled several times over the irregularities of the terrain. Her legs already tired from the desperate run, but there was always a firm hand, sometimes Damien's, sometimes Adrian's, to support her fall. Behind them, the headlights of Augustus's vehicles cut through the night like predators' eyes. The sound of engines was getting closer, and Aurora knew they couldn't maintain that pace for much longer. Her breath came out in white vapors in the freezing air, and a sharp pain began to form in her right side. There's a fisherman's cabin 2 miles from here, Adrian said, his voice interrupted by the effort. We can hide there until dawn. And then what? Aurora asked, struggling to keep pace with the 2 men. Then we'll see, Damien replied, turning to look behind them. The car lights seemed closer. First, we need to get off this property. They descended a steep hill and Aurora slipped on the wet grass. Damien caught her before she fell, pulling her against his chest. For a moment, the 3 stood still, catching their breath, and Aurora realized the absurdity of the situation. She was fleeing through the freezing night with 2 identical men, pregnant with a child that could belong to either of them, pursued by a megalomaniac patriarch who saw her as a laboratory animal. Aurora, Adrian said softly, are you okay? Do you need to rest? She shook her head. I'm pregnant, not invalid. But the truth was that she felt exhausted. The revelation of the pregnancy still left her dizzy, and the run was taking its toll. Damien must have noticed her paleness even in the darkness. We'll go slowly from here on, he decided. We can use the trees as cover. They reached a small eucalyptus forest that offered some protection against the winds and against the eyes of their pursuers. Aurora leaned against a tree, trying to regulate her breathing. It was then that the reality of everything finally hit her. I'm going to have a child, she whispered, her hands instinctively going to her still flat belly. Damien and Adrian observed her in silence. There was a palpable tension between the brothers, something that had intensified since they learned of the pregnancy. Aurora, Damien approached. About the baby. No, she interrupted him. Not now. First we need to survive this night. But Adrian stepped forward. It needs to be said. Damien, you had her first, but You what? Damien turned to his brother, his fists clenching. You invaded my room, deceived an innocent woman. Like you did with Isabella, Adrian exploded. Don't play the saint, brother. We both know how this game has always worked. Isabella was different, Damien said through clenched teeth. She fell in love with both of us, Aurora. Aurora is right here, she said firmly, placing herself between the two men. And I don't belong to either of you. What happened, happened. Now we need to focus on getting out of this situation alive. From deep in the forest came the sound of branches breaking. The three stiffened, hearing distant voices approaching. Augustus had sent men on foot to search the areas where cars couldn't pass. This way, Adrian whispered, indicating an almost invisible trail between the trees. They walked in silence for 20 minutes, always alert to the sounds around them. Aurora noticed how the brothers moved in a coordinated way, as if they shared an internal radar. Despite all the tension between them, they still functioned as a unit when necessary. The cabin appeared as a darker shadow against the night. It was small, built with rough wood and clearly abandoned for years. Adrian checked the interior before motioning for them to enter. Inside, the smell of mold and dampness was strong, but at least they were protected from the wind. There was some old furniture covered by dusty sheets, and a small fireplace that they couldn't use for fear of drawing attention with the smoke. Aurora sat in an old chair, finally allowing fatigue to dominate her. How long do we have before they find us? Until dawn if we're lucky, Damien replied, checking the windows. After that, we'll have to keep running. Where to? Aurora asked. You heard Augustus. He has unlimited resources. How are we going to escape someone like that? Adrian sat on the floor near her. I have some contacts. People who owe me favors from the time I was dead. We can get fake documents, passage to another country. And abandon everything. Aurora looked at the two men. Are you willing to do that? To leave your family, your inheritance, everything? For you? Damien turned from the window, his grey eyes reflecting the little light that entered. Yes, for you and the baby, Adrian agreed. Yes, Aurora felt tears burn her eyes. How can I trust you? How do I know this isn't just another game between you two? The brothers exchanged a long, loaded look. Finally, Damien spoke. Because this time we're not playing. This time we're fighting. And why? What's so special about me? You see us, Adrian said softly, as separate people, not as two halves of the same coin. With Isabella, she loved the idea of us. With you, you chose. I chose. On the first night, Damien explained, when you responded to my touch, when you said my name, there was something genuine there, something I'd never felt before. And when I was with you, Adrian continued, I realized that I wanted to be seen, really seen, not just as my brother's reflection. Aurora observed them, seeing for the first time vulnerable men behind the masks of power and control. And if the child is Damien's, I'll still love you, Adrian answered without hesitation. And if it's Adrian's, I'll raise that child as my own, Damien said with the same conviction. Aurora rose slowly, walking to the small window of the cabin. Outside she could see lights moving in the distance. The search continued. You realize that even if we escape, even if we manage to start a new life, I would have to choose one of you. I can't live forever divided between two men. The silence that followed was tense. Finally, Adrian spoke. Then choose. Now? Now, Damien agreed. Before it's too late. Aurora closed her eyes, feeling the weight of the decision. She thought of the first night with Damien, of the vulnerability she saw in his grey eyes. She thought of Adrian, of the wild passion and the pain he carried from having been forced to live as a ghost. Both had lied to her, but both were also willing to sacrifice everything for her. I can't, she said finally. I can't choose between you because I love you both. The confession left her lips before she could stop it. Aurora turned to face the two men, seeing shock and pain in both faces. I love Damien for the way he fights against his own nature, how he tries to be better than he was raised to be. And I love Adrian for the passion he carries, for the courage to rebel against a system that tried to destroy him. Aurora, Damien began. Let me finish. She took a deep breath. But I also know that I can't have both, and I know that you can't continue sharing. So here's my proposal. Whoever the father of this baby is, that will be the man I choose. I'll let fate decide. Damien and Adrian looked at each other, a silent communication passing between them. Finally, both nodded. It's decided then, Adrian said. From outside, the sound of voices grew closer. Aurora moved quickly away from the window. They found us. Back door, Damien said, walking toward the rear exit of the cabin. But when he opened the door, he found himself face to face with two armed men wearing military clothes. "Good evening, Mr. Vance," one of them said with a cold smile. "Your grandfather would like to see you." They were surrounded. The escape had ended before it had really begun. Aurora touched her belly again, instinctively protecting the life growing inside her. Whatever fate awaited them, she would fight to the end for her child, and for the two men she loved in different ways, but equally deeply. The return to the estate was a somber procession. Aurora, Damien, and Adrian were escorted by Augustus's armed men across the same fields they had crossed running hours before. The patriarch awaited them in the library, seated in a leather armchair like a judge ready to pass sentences. Irene was nowhere to be seen, and Aurora felt her heart tighten as she imagined the brave housekeeper's fate. "Brought me presents," Augustus said when the three were pushed into the room. "How considerate. Where is Irene?" Aurora asked before anyone could stop her. "The ex-employee is indisposed," Augustus replied coldly. "A pity she chose the wrong loyalty. But you'll have time to grieve together in the cellar." Aurora felt nauseous. "You killed her." "She killed herself the moment she decided to point a gun at me." Augustus stood up, walking to a table where documents were spread out. "But we're not here to discuss insubordinate employees. We're here to resolve a logistical problem." Edward entered the room carrying a medical case. His eyes avoided Aurora's, and she realized the man was broken inside, probably a reluctant accomplice to his father's crimes. "The paternity test will be conducted now," Augustus announced. "Once we determine which of my inadequate grandsons is the father, the other will be dispensed with." "Dispensed how?" Adrian asked, though everyone knew the answer. "In the same way you should have been 5 years ago." Augustus smiled coldly. "I cannot allow defective genes to contaminate my project." Aurora felt a fury growing inside her, a rage she had never experienced before. "Your project? You talk about people as if they were laboratory animals." "That's exactly what they are," Augustus responded. "Including you, my dear. Your family carries specific genes that, when combined with the Vance lineage, will produce exceptional characteristics. But only with the right father." "And who would be the right father?" Damien asked. "The one who didn't try to murder the last carrier," Augustus said, looking directly at Adrian. "The one who understands discipline and obedience." Aurora looked at the two men she loved and made a decision that would change everything. "No." "What?" "I said no." Aurora stepped forward, facing Augustus without fear. "There will be no paternity test. There will be no more experiments. And there definitely will be no murders." Augustus laughed. "My dear, you are in no position to make demands." "Yes, I am." Aurora took a deep breath, remembering something she had discovered years ago in her grandmother's papers. "Because you made a crucial mistake in your research about my family." Augustus's expression changed slightly. "What mistake?" "You thought I was just a passive receptacle for your superior genes. But the mutation my family carries isn't just physical or intellectual. It's legal." "What are you talking about?" Aurora smiled for the first time in days. "For my great-grandmother, Eleanor Bennett, wasn't just a carrier of rare genes. She was the heiress to one of the largest mining fortunes in America, her fortune that was stolen from the family through fraudulent contracts. Contracts signed by the Vances in the 1920s. The silence in the room was deafening. Augustus had visibly paled. "Documents that," Aurora continued, "are kept in 3 different banks with instructions to be opened if anything happens to me or to any direct descendant of the Bennett family. Documents that would prove the Vance fortune was built on theft and fraud." "You're lying," Augustus said, but his voice had lost its conviction. "Edward," Aurora turned to the administrator, "check the records from 1923. Look for a transaction involving the mines of Joseph Bennett." "My great-grandfather." Edward looked between Aurora and his father, then ran out of the room. Augustus remained motionless, but Aurora could see the panic growing in his blue eyes. "Even if this is true," he finally said, "you're still pregnant. You still need protection. And I still have enough power to—" "To what?" A new voice cut through the air. Everyone turned to see Irene standing at the entrance, injured but alive. "To threaten a pregnant woman? To kill your own grandsons?" "Irene!" Aurora exclaimed, running to embrace the housekeeper. "I thought you were dead," Adrian said, genuinely moved. "I thought so too," Irene smiled sadly. But Edward locked me in the cellar instead of... Well, he's not as cruel as his father. Augustus was visibly disturbed now. His carefully constructed plans were crumbling before his eyes. This changes nothing. You're still ill-free, a new voice said from the door. A middle-aged man wearing a federal police uniform entered, accompanied by several agents. Augustus Vance, you're under arrest for kidnapping, false imprisonment, and document fraud. Aurora turned to Irene. You called the police? I had a hidden phone in the cellar, Irene explained. And I've been collecting evidence for years. I never trusted what happened with Isabella. As Augustus was handcuffed and led away, he shouted one last threat. This isn't over. My family has influence you can't even imagine. But Aurora didn't flinch. Your family now has to answer for a century of crimes. And as for your genetic plans, well, my child will grow up free to choose their own destiny. When the house finally fell silent, the three found themselves alone in the library. Edward had decided to cooperate fully with the authorities, providing evidence against his father in exchange for immunity. What now? Damien asked, looking at Aurora and Adrian. Aurora touched her belly, feeling a peace she hadn't experienced in months. Now we find out who the father is. But first, I need you both to understand something. The brothers watched her attentively. I love you. I love you both in different ways, but real ways. Damien, you taught me that strength can come from gentleness. Adrian, you showed me that rebellion can be a form of love. Aurora took a deep breath. But I also learned that I don't need to choose the way the world expects. What do you mean? Adrian asked. I mean, I want you both in my life. Not as rivals, not as a game of division, but as a family. A strange, unconventional family, but a family. Damien frowned. Aurora, you know that isn't normal. Socially accepted? Aurora smiled. After everything we've been through, do you really care about what's normal? The brothers looked at each other, and Aurora saw something changing between them. The competitive tension was being replaced by something deeper, mutual understanding. You've spent your entire lives being forced to be one person, she continued. Maybe it's time you learn to be two men who can love the same woman without destroying each other. 3 months later, the DNA test results arrived. Aurora was in the new house they had purchased in Aspen, a small but cozy property, far from the ghosts of the past. Damien was on her left side on the sofa, Adrian on her right. As she opened the envelope, Damien, she read aloud, 99.7% probability of paternity. Adrian sighed deeply, a mixture of disappointment and relief crossing his face. So it's decided. No, Aurora said firmly. Damien is the biological father, but you, Adrian, will be the most present godfather any child could have. And when I have other children... Other children? Damien asked, surprised. Well, Aurora smiled mischievously. A family needs more than one child, don't you think? Adrian laughed, the first genuine laugh she had heard from him. Are you suggesting that... I'm suggesting we build something new. Something none of us had before. A family based on love, not control or tradition or genetic experiments. Damien took her hand. And if it doesn't work out? Then we'll try again, Aurora answered. But I have a feeling we'll do well. 6 months later, Elena Vance Bennett was born in a Portland hospital, surrounded by more love than any child could need. Damien held his daughter in his arms for the first time, tears streaming down his face, while Adrian recorded the moment on a camera. She has your eyes, Adrian said to Aurora, who was resting in the hospital bed. And the stubbornness of her father, Aurora laughed. Observing how the baby refused to let go of Damien's finger. Which father? Damien asked with a smile. Both of you, Aurora answered, and finally knew she had found her place in the world. The traditional Vance family had been destroyed, its secrets exposed, its criminal wealth confiscated.